With the first light of dawn marking her final hours, her last request wasn't for absolution or mercy. It was to see her wolf one last time. But what happened next would shake the castle walls, silence the court, and reveal a darkness that had hidden behind a lord's banner for years. The stone walls of Greymorn Fortress breathed cold that morning, as if the castle itself mourned what dawn would bring. In the depths beneath the keep, where torch flames cast dancing shadows on slick stone, Lady Eadlyn Blackwood sat in chains that had worn her wrists raw over 9 months of darkness. She was once the pride of her father, Sir Garrett Blackwood, the king's decorated war hero, but time and accusation had transformed her. Raven dark hair hung in tangled strands, skin pale as death itself. Yet her eyes, those unsettling amber eyes they called wolf-touched, still held an ember of defiance the dungeon could not extinguish. The guards descended the spiral staircase, expecting the usual final wish. A priest to hear confession, perhaps a letter to family who'd already disowned her, maybe a plea for a quicker death than burning. Royal Steward Godwin followed behind them, his weathered face grave in the torchlight. In 30 years of service, he'd granted countless last requests, each one a small mercy before the inevitable. "Lady Eadlyn," Godwin began, his voice echoing off the damp walls, "the law permits you one final comfort before sunrise. What would you have?" She looked up slowly, those amber eyes catching the firelight like a wolf's in darkness. For a long moment she said nothing. The guards shifted uneasily. Brother Aldis, the fortress chaplain hovering near the stairs, clutched his wooden cross tighter. When she finally spoke, her voice was stronger than her frail frame suggested. Clear, certain. "I wish to see Fenrir. My wolf, one last time." The silence that followed felt like the air before lightning strikes. Brother Aldis gasped audibly. One of the younger guards took an involuntary step backward. Even Godwin, practiced in maintaining composure, felt his carefully neutral expression crack. "My lady," he began carefully, "surely you would prefer—" "I know what you expect," Eadlyn interrupted, chains rattling as she leaned forward. "A priest to cleanse my supposedly blackened soul. Perhaps my mother, to weep and beg forgiveness I won't give. Maybe wine to dull the pain of the flames." She shook her head slowly. "But I'm not asking for comfort, Steward Godwin. I'm asking for truth." Brother Aldis found his voice, shrill with outrage. "The beast is evidence of your corruption, found beside that poor child's torn body, its muzzle red with her blood. You ask to commune with your demon familiar before meeting your maker." Eadlyn's gaze shifted to the chaplain, and something in those eyes made him flinch. Not malice, something worse, pity. "Fenrir was found near Clara Millerson's body because he tried to protect her," she said quietly. "The blood on him was from trying to drag her to safety, not from killing her." But no one wanted to hear that. Easier to blame the wolf. Easier to blame the woman who refused Lord Thorngate's marriage proposal and kept her father's lands. "Blasphemy," Brother Aldis sputtered. "You twist facts to suit your wickedness." But Godwin held up a hand for silence. Something in Eadlyn's words resonated with the doubts he'd buried for months. The case against her had been swift. Convenient. Lord Commander Aldric Thorngate's testimony about unnatural wolf activity had sealed her fate. The wolf, as evidence, made it irrefutable. Too neat. Too clean. "Why the wolf, my lady?" Godwin asked softly. "Why not seek peace with your god?" Eadlyn's expression softened for the first time. A ghost of who she must have been before these stone walls claimed her. "I raised Fenrir from a cub when hunters killed his mother. For 8 years he's been my shadow, my guardian. When my father died at the king's side, Fenrir kept me from drowning in grief. When the kingdom whispered that a woman couldn't hold Blackwood lands alone, he walked beside me and made them think twice." She paused, and her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. 9 months I've sat in this darkness, and not one person from my former life has come. Not my mother, not my brothers, not the villagers I helped through every winter. They've all decided I'm a monster." Her chains clinked as she pressed a hand to her heart. "But Fenrir knows. He was there that night. He knows what really happened in those woods." "The wolf cannot testify," Brother Aldis said dismissively. "No," Eadlyn agreed, meeting Godwin's eyes with desperate intensity. "But he can look at me one last time without judgment, without fear, without hatred. He is all I have left who knows the truth. And if I'm to burn, Steward Godwin, grant me this one mercy. Let me say goodbye to the only soul in this kingdom who still sees me as innocent." The words hung in the frigid air. Godwin studied her face, the hollowed cheeks, the trembling chin she tried so hard to keep steady, the eyes bright with unshed tears she refused to let fall. This was not the face of a woman begging. This was the face of someone asking for one last moment of dignity before the world consumed her. I will consider it, he said finally, and turned toward the stairs before she could see the conflict in his own expression. Behind him, Lady Eadlyn Blackwood closed her eyes and allowed herself the smallest breath of hope. Within the hour, the castle's senior officials gathered in the narrow council chamber above the kitchens. The room felt suffocating despite its high ceiling, thick with tension and the acrid smell of tallow candles burning low. Brother Aldous paced like a caged animal, his brown robe swishing with each agitated turn. Absolutely not. To bring that creature into the castle is to invite Satan himself through our gates. His voice cracked with fervor. The wolf is evidence, steward, evidence of her pact with darkness. We cannot allow this mockery of holy law. Young Captain Osric, barely 20 and eager to prove his worth, nodded vigorously. The security risk alone is madness. A wolf, even chained, could tear through 3 men before we brought it down. And if it escapes, the chaos. The wolf has been in our beast pit for 9 months, interrupted Guard Captain Brennan. His voice carried the weight of 40 years' service, rough as grinding stone. He sat in the corner, scarred hands folded across his barrel chest, gray beard braided in the old military fashion. If it were truly demon-possessed, wouldn't it have manifested something by now? Killed its handlers? Escaped through hellfire? Brother Aldous whirled on him. Perhaps it waits for its mistress's command. Perhaps this very request is the signal for some dark ritual. Or perhaps, Brennan said slowly, meeting the chaplain's wild-eyed stare, it's just a wolf. And she's just a woman who wants to say goodbye. The room fell silent. Lord Commander Aldric Thorngate stood by the window, backlit by pre-dawn gray, his face unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured, controlled. The law permits a condemned prisoner one final comfort, within reason. However unusual the request, we should honor it. To deny her would make us appear afraid of a chained woman and a caged animal. He turned, steel-gray eyes sweeping the room. Let her have her farewell. Let the castle witness what happens when women forsake God's order for beasts and wilderness. Godwin studied Thorngate carefully. Something in the Lord Commander's tone felt calculated, too smooth. 9 months ago, Thorngate's testimony had been the sword that fell on Eadlyn's neck. His words about unnatural wolf activity and corruption of Christian womanhood had swayed the court. Yet now he advocated for her request? You surprise me, Lord Commander, Godwin said quietly. You were her harshest accuser. Aldric's expression remained stone. I accused her of witchcraft and murder. Nothing changes by letting her see the beast before they both face judgment. If anything, it proves our case. A final demonstration of her unnatural bond. Brother Aldis seized on this, nodding frantically. Yes, a public display of her sin. The people will see the monster and her familiar together, understand the righteousness of the sentence. But Brennan's weathered face had darkened. In 9 months, I've escorted that woman to 3 hearings, 2 blessings she never asked for, and countless visits from priests trying to extract confessions. His voice grew quieter, more dangerous. Not once did she curse them. Not once did she rage or weep or beg. She's shown no malice, no madness, only grief. He looked directly at Brother Aldous. I've guarded real witches, Father. Women who cackled and spat and carved symbols in their own flesh. That girl down there, she sits in silence and remembers her dead father. The words landed like stones in still water. Even Osric looked uncertain now. Godwin moved to the table where Eadlyn's case file lay open, the parchment yellowed and curling at the edges. He'd read it a dozen times, but something about tonight made him read it again. Sir Garrett Blackwood, decorated war hero, died in the king's service. Lands passed to his only daughter, no sons. Lord Thorngate had petitioned to claim them, citing ancient laws about unmarried women. Petition denied. 3 months later, a village girl found dead. Wolf discovered nearby. Eadlyn arrested. The wolf has been docile in captivity? Godwin asked, not looking up from the documents. Brennan nodded. Handlers say he's calm. Eats what they give him. Doesn't even growl unless startled. Acts like any captured animal. Not a demon familiar. Because it waits, Brother Aldous insisted. It bides its time for. Enough. Godwin's command cut through the hysteria. He closed the file and looked around the room, his decision forming like ice crystallizing on water. We grant the request. Dawn. Inner courtyard, not the public square. The wolf remains chained and muzzled at all times. Armed guards on all sides, at least 12. Captain Brennan, you'll supervise personally. Steward, this is, Brother Aldous began. This is mercy, Godwin said firmly. The one thing our faith teaches above all else, Father. If we deny even this small humanity to the condemned, what does that make us? He stood, the scraping of his chair final as a judge's gavel. 10 minutes. No more. If anything goes wrong, Captain Brennan has authority to end it immediately. Aldric inclined his head, expression unreadable. As you command, steward. As the officials filed out, Brennan lingered. When they were alone, he spoke low. You feel it too, don't you? Something about this case feels too convenient, Godwin finished. A woman refuses marriage, keeps her lands, and suddenly she's a witch with a killer wolf. He met Brennan's knowing gaze. But feeling isn't evidence, and by noon, she'll be ash regardless. Unless the wolf knows something we don't, Brennan said quietly, and left before Godwin could respond. Alone in the chamber, Godwin stared at the case file. Outside, the castle began to stir with whispered news. The witch would see her familiar before burning. By breakfast, every soul in Greymorn would know. And in the beast pit below, a gray wolf lifted his head toward the lightening sky, as if he could smell dawn coming. Dawn broke over Greymorn Fortress like a blade, cold and sharp and merciless. The inner courtyard lay wrapped in that strange half-light between darkness and day, when the world holds its breath and waits. 12 guards stood in formation around the perimeter, their armor catching the first pale rays of sun like scattered stars. Captain Brennan stood near the center, hand resting on his sword hilt, eyes scanning every shadow. Royal Steward Godwin waited by the eastern gate, his face carved from the same stone as the walls around them. Brother Aldous lurked near the chapel entrance, clutching his cross so tightly his knuckles had gone white. And Lord Commander Aldric Thorngate observed from the western archway, perfectly still, perfectly composed. The courtyard was silent. Even the ravens that normally cawed from the battlements seemed to sense something sacred, or damned, about this moment. Then came the sound of chains, heavy, dragging, the scrape of claws on stone. The southern gate groaned open, and 6 men struggled through, hauling on iron chains, thick as ship rigging. Between them, fighting every step, came Fenrir. He was massive, larger than Godwin remembered from the trial, though perhaps captivity had only made him seem more wild, more elemental. Gray fur rippled over muscle and bone, scarred from 9 months in the beast pit but still magnificent. His eyes, pale amber, almost gold, swept the courtyard with intelligence that made several guards shift nervously. The heavy muzzle strapped across his face couldn't hide the power in those jaws, the way his lips curled back to show teeth like ivory daggers. This was no demon, but it was no pet either. This was something older than castles and courts, something that remembered when wolves ran free and men feared the dark. The handlers dragged him to the center of the courtyard and locked his chains to the iron ring embedded in the stone. Fenrir strained against the restraints, not panicked, but searching. His head swiveled, nostrils flaring, looking for her. The northern gate opened. Lady Eadlyn Blackwood emerged flanked by 2 guards, and the transformation in the wolf was instantaneous. His entire body went rigid. The straining against chains stopped. Every muscle coiled tight as a drawn bow. He'd found her. Eadlyn's chains clinked as she walked forward on unsteady legs, 9 months of darkness having stolen her strength but not her will. She wore the same torn dress from her arrest, gray now with grime, but she moved with the bearing of the knight's daughter she was. Her amber eyes, so like the wolf's it was uncanny, never left Fenrir. 10 feet from him, her legs gave out. She dropped to her knees on the cold stone, and the sound that escaped her throat was something between a sob and a prayer. Fenrir, she whispered. Oh, my friend. The wolf whined, a sound so heartbroken it made hardened soldiers look away. He pulled against the chains, not violently, but desperately, trying to reach her, trying to close the impossible distance between them. Godwin found himself speaking before he'd decided to. Loosen the muzzle, not off, just enough. Brother Aldous gasped. Steward, you cannot. I can, and I will. Do it. The handlers hesitated, then carefully adjusted the leather straps. The muzzle loosened enough for Fenrir to open his jaws partially, to breathe freely, to make sounds beyond muffled whines. And he did. A keening howl that echoed off the castle walls and seemed to carry 9 months of separation in its voice. Eadlyn crawled forward, chains dragging behind her. The guards tensed, but Brennan held up a hand. Let her go. She reached Fenrir, and he surged forward as far as the chains allowed, pressing his massive head against her chest, with such force she nearly fell backward. Her arms came up around his neck, fingers tangling in thick fur matted from captivity, and she buried her face against him. I'm sorry, she choked out, voice breaking. I'm so sorry, old friend. I'm so sorry. The wolf's entire body trembled. His eyes squeezed shut. If animals could weep, Godwin thought, This one would be drowning. For a moment, the fortress vanished. The guards, the execution, the charges and trials and accusations. All of it fell away like autumn leaves, leaving only this: a woman and a wolf who had survived together, who were about to die together, sharing one last moment of grace in a graceless world. Eadlyn's memories flooded back in waves. Finding him as a cub, tiny and mewling, his mother's body still warm from the hunter's arrow, feeding him from a cloth soaked in goat's milk. The first time he'd followed her through Blackwood Forest, clumsy on oversized paws. The way he'd grown from stumbling pup to fierce guardian. How he'd laid his head on her lap the night her father's body came home draped across his horse. The hundreds of sunrise runs through the forest, when the world was just them and the wind and the freedom of open ground. All of it ending here, on cold stone, in chains. She pressed her forehead against his, and they stayed like that, woman and wolf, breathing together, hearts beating in time. Pure sorrow, mixed with fierce gratitude. This was goodbye, but it was also proof that something in this world had stayed loyal. That love, even between species, could survive accusation and imprisonment and death itself. "Thank you," she whispered against his fur, "for never forgetting me." Fenrir's eyes opened, and in them was something that transcended animal instinct. Recognition, devotion, grief, and something else. Something that looked almost like determination. For 3 heartbeats, the world was perfect. Eadlyn's hands buried in Fenrir's fur, their foreheads pressed together, breathing in sync. The courtyard held its collective breath, witnessing something beyond their understanding. A bond that transcended words and laws and the coming flames. Then Fenrir's entire body went rigid. The change was so sudden, so complete, that Eadlyn felt it like a shock through her own bones. His muscles turned to stone beneath her hands. His breathing stopped mid-exhale. The gentle pressure of his head against her chest became an immovable weight. "Fenrir," she whispered. A growl began. Low, deep, rising from somewhere primal and ancient, a sound that made the hair on every neck in the courtyard stand on end. It built like distant thunder, growing louder, more threatening, vibrating through the stone beneath them. His head lifted slowly from her embrace, turning. His amber eyes, moments ago soft with grief, now blazed with something feral. Something that knew blood and violence, and the hunt. And they locked on a single target. Lord Commander Aldric Thorngate stood 20 feet away in the western archway, arms crossed over his polished breastplate. He'd been watching in silence, perfectly composed, perfectly still, until Fenrir saw him. The wolf's lips curled back, revealing every tooth. The growl became a snarl that echoed off the castle walls like a war cry. His haunches coiled, muscles bunching with lethal intent. "Easy, beast," one of the handlers called nervously, tightening his grip on the chains. "Easy now." Fenrir exploded forward. The iron ring groaned. One of the chains, corroded from months in the beast pit's dampness, snapped with a sound like breaking bone. The wolf surged across the courtyard with terrifying speed, dragging 2 handlers off their feet, the remaining chains screaming as they pulled taut. His target never wavered. Aldric. Guards shouted. Brennan roared commands. Steel sang as swords cleared scabbards. But Fenrir was a storm unleashed, all fury and focused violence, eyes locked on the Lord Commander with murder blazing in them. Aldric stumbled backward, his composure shattering. His face went white. "Kill it. Kill the beast now." 4 guards threw themselves onto the remaining chains. Others formed a wall of shields and spears between the wolf and Aldric. Fenrir strained against them, foam flying from his jaws, that bone-deep snarl never ceasing. He lunged again, and another link bent dangerously. "Stand down," Brennan bellowed, moving between them. "Hold those chains. Get the Lord Commander back." But Fenrir wasn't attacking randomly. He ignored the guards, ignored the spears pointed at his chest, ignored everything except Aldric Thorngate, who had pressed himself against the archway stones, hand on his sword hilt, breathing hard. "No," Eadlyn's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. She struggled to her feet, chains rattling. "No, don't hurt him. The beast proves her witchcraft." Brother Aldous shrieked from the chapel entrance, waving his cross. "It attacks at her command. Sorcery. Demon familiar. He's never done this." Eadlyn shouted, desperation cracking her voice. She moved toward Fenrir, hands outstretched, despite the danger. "Fenrir, please." She stopped, realization dawning across her face like sunrise. Her gaze shifted from the wolf to Aldric, and something in her expression changed. Hardened. "He's never done this except when I was in danger. Real danger." The wolf continued to strain toward Aldric, every muscle in his body screaming aggression, but he let Eadlyn touch his flank. let her hand rest on his trembling shoulder. He didn't turn away from his target, didn't stop that deep warning snarl, but he didn't attack her touch. He knows, Eadlyn said quietly, but her voice carried in the sudden hush. He knows something about you, Lord Commander. Aldric's face had regained some color, but his eyes, those cold gray eyes, flickered with something that might have been fear. Or guilt. Or calculation. The creature is mad. 9 months caged has broken its mind. Fenrir lunged again, and this time his snarl became a roar. The remaining chains creaked. Guards shouted. One shield cracked under the impact of his weight. That's not madness, Brennan said slowly, stepping back from the wolf, his veteran's eyes studying the situation with new understanding. That's specific. That's targeted. He looked at Aldric, and his weathered face had gone stone cold. I've seen war dogs, my lord. Trained to kill. They attack anything that moves. This wolf ignores 12 armed men and wants only you. Because the witch commands it. Aldric snapped, but there was something desperate in his voice now. Something that didn't match his usual authority. Eadlyn's eyes narrowed. Her mind raced through that night, 9 months ago. Clara Millerson found dead in the forest. Fenrir discovered nearby. Blood on his muzzle from trying to help. And Aldric. Aldric had been first on scene. Aldric who found the body. Aldric whose testimony convicted her. Aldric who now stood pressed against stone, face pale, breathing too fast for a man innocent of all but witnessing an animal's fury. He was there that night, Eadlyn said, and though she spoke to no one in particular, every person in the courtyard heard her. You were in Blackwood Forest the night Clara died. You told the court you arrived after. But Fenrir remembers. He remembers your scent. The wolf's snarl intensified at the sound of her voice, as if confirming her words. His eyes never left Aldric, never wavered. The guards holding his chains exchanged nervous glances. Even Brother Aldous had gone silent, his cross hanging forgotten in his hands. Godwyn stepped forward, his face unreadable, but his voice carrying the weight of authority. Lord Commander Thorngate, perhaps we should discuss what happened that night. In detail, and in the terrible silence that followed, Fenrir's growl continued, steady, certain, and damning as any testimony. The moment stretched taut as a bowstring. Guards surrounded Fenrir with leveled spears, waiting for the order. The wolf strained against his chains, still fixated on Aldric, that damning growl rolling through the courtyard like approaching thunder. Brother Aldous was calling for immediate execution of the beast. Aldric had straightened, regaining his composure, his hand no longer trembling on his sword hilt. Then a voice cracked through the tension, young and terrified but determined. My lord steward, I must speak. Every head turned. A boy pushed through the cluster of guards near the eastern gate, barely 16, gangly in an ill-fitting squire's tunic, brown hair plastered to his forehead with nervous sweat. His hands shook, but his jaw was set with desperate resolve. Godwyn raised a hand, halting the guards. Who are you? Oswin, my lord. Squire to the late Sir Garrett Blackwood. The boy's voice wavered, but held. I served Lady Eadlyn's father until his death. I was there that night, the night Clara Millerson died. The courtyard went deathly silent. Even Fenrir's growl lowered to a rumble, though his eyes never left Aldric. Speak, Godwyn commanded. Oswin swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I saw Lord Commander Aldric leaving Blackwood Forest that night. It was late, past midnight. I was returning from the village when I saw him on the forest path. His voice grew stronger, words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. His sword was drawn. There was blood on his hands, on his tunic. He saw me, and the boy's breath hitched. Lies. Aldric's voice boomed across the courtyard, cutting like a whip. The boy fabricates stories to save his mistress. He seeks attention, glory. Fenrir erupted. The wolf lunged so violently that 2 guards lost their footing. His snarl became a roar, foam flying from his jaws, every tooth bared at Aldric. The intensity of his rage at the sound of that voice made several men step back involuntarily. Oswin flinched but stood his ground. He threatened to hang me if I spoke. The words came out in a rush now, 9 months of terror and guilt spilling forth. He said no one would believe a low-born squire over a lord commander. Said I'd be charged as an accomplice, that my family would lose everything. I was 16 and afraid, and I stayed silent. Tears streaked his face. I stayed silent while Lady Eadlyn rotted in a dungeon for a crime she didn't commit. I'm a coward, but I can't. I won't let her burn for my silence. Godwyn's weathered face had gone hard as granite, his eyes fixed on Aldric with new scrutiny, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. Lord Commander, you testified you arrived at the scene after the body was discovered. You made no mention of being in Blackwood Forest that night. Because I wasn't, Aldric said coldly, but sweat beaded his temple despite the morning chill. The boy is either mistaken or lying, perhaps both. I demand he be arrested immediately for bearing false witness against a lord of the realm. The wolf doesn't think he's lying, Brennan said quietly. The old guard captain had moved closer, his scarred face thoughtful. Notice, Fenrir's been aggressive only twice. When he first saw you, Lord Commander. And now, when you speak. He gestured at the wolf, who strained against chains that groaned under the pressure, still fixated on Aldric with murderous intent. He ignores everyone else. Doesn't even look at the boy who's accusing you. Just you. That's no coincidence. Brother Aldous stepped forward hesitantly. Animals cannot bear witness, but they can recognize threats, Eadlyn said, her voice cutting clear through the chaos. She stood beside Fenrir now, one hand on his trembling flank, her amber eyes blazing. Fenrir only showed aggression to protect me from real danger. When hunters came too close. When a drunk merchant grabbed my arm in the market. When my brother's friend tried to, she stopped, jaw tightening. He knows threats. He remembers them. She turned to face Aldric fully, and there was something terrible in her gaze, not hatred. Worse, understanding. You were there. You killed Clara, and Fenrir tried to stop you, didn't he? That's why he had blood on him. That's why he was found near the body. He was trying to protect her, and when he couldn't, he stayed with her until someone came. Her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, but sharp as broken glass. And you used that loyalty to condemn us both. Aldric's face had gone from pale to flushed, his composure cracking like river ice in spring. This is absurd. I will not stand here and be accused by a witch, a child, and a beast. Then sit, Godwin said flatly. Captain Brennan, secure the Lord Commander. Gently, but thoroughly. We will convene an emergency council immediately. You cannot be serious. Aldric's hand flew to his sword hilt, and the moment he did, Fenrir went berserk. The wolf's roar shook the courtyard. Another chain link bent dangerously. Guards rushed forward, but the violence in the wolf's response to that single gesture, Aldric reaching for his weapon, spoke volumes. Brennan and 3 guards moved to flank Aldric, hands on their weapons but not drawn. My lord, please come peacefully. We're merely investigating new testimony. For a moment, Aldric looked ready to fight. His eyes darted to the gates, to the walls, calculating. Then his shoulders dropped, and he sneered. Very well. When this farce is over and the witch burns as scheduled, I'll remember every man who doubted my word. But as guards escorted him toward the keep, Oswin collapsed to his knees, shaking with relief and terror at what he'd just done. Eadlyn pressed her face against Fenrir's neck, feeling his thundering heartbeat against her cheek. Good boy, she whispered. You remembered. You brave, loyal, beautiful boy. You remembered. And for the first time in 9 months, the faintest spark of hope flickered in the darkness. The great hall filled within the hour, summoned by bells that rang urgency across Greymorn Fortress. Lords and officials crowded onto benches, their voices a low murmur of speculation and scandal. Torches burned in their brackets, despite the morning light streaming through high windows, casting dancing shadows across ancient stone. At the far end, the seat of judgment stood empty. This was the royal steward's court now, and Godwin would preside. Lady Eadlyn was brought through the side entrance, still in chains but walking upright, flanked by guards who no longer looked at her with the same certainty they'd shown yesterday. Her eyes swept the hall, the same room where she'd been condemned 9 months ago, and her expression remained carved from ice. If she felt fear, she buried it deep. Through the western windows, the courtyard was visible. Fenrir paced the length of his chains, agitated, his attention fixed on the hall. Waiting. Watching. Lord Commander Aldric Thorngate stood near the front, no longer in custody, but clearly under scrutiny. His armor had been removed at Godwin's order, leaving him in a simple tunic that somehow made him look smaller. Less commanding. Sweat darkened the collar, despite the hall's chill. Godwin took his place at the judgment seat, his weathered face grave. This emergency council is convened under the king's law to examine new testimony regarding the case of Lady Eadlyn Blackwood. His voice carried to every corner. The execution is stayed until we establish truth. Brother Aldous rose from his bench, agitated. Steward, this is irregular. The witch was tried and convicted, and new evidence has emerged that demands examination. Godwin cut him off. Squire Oswin, step forward. The boy approached, visibly trembling but resolute. He repeated his testimony, seeing Aldric leaving Blackwood Forest, blood on his hands and sword, the threats that followed. His voice shook but never wavered. When he finished, the hall buzzed with whispered conversation. Godwin turned his attention to Aldric. Lord Commander, the squire places you in Blackwood Forest, the night of Clara Millerson's death. What was your business there? Aldric's jaw tightened. I was hunting. I often ride those woods. There's no law against it. Yet you never mentioned this during Lady Eadlyn's trial. You testified only to discovering the body the following morning, after villagers raised the alarm. Godwin's tone remained neutral, but his eyes were sharp. You saw nothing unusual that evening? Heard nothing? A young girl was murdered within hours of your presence there. The forest is vast, Aldric said, his voice controlled but strained. I was miles from where the body was found. I saw nothing, because there was nothing to see in my vicinity. Convenient. Eadlyn's voice rang clear across the hall. Heads turned. She'd been silent for so long that many had forgotten what her voice sounded like. Strong, educated, bearing the aristocratic cadence of her father's house. Convenient that you rode those woods that specific night. Convenient that you found the body. Convenient that your testimony sealed my conviction. She took a step forward, chains clinking. Most convenient of all, that when I was condemned as a witch, my father's lands, promised to me by his own hand before he died in the king's service, reverted to crown jurisdiction. And you, Lord Commander, immediately petitioned to claim them. The murmuring in the hall grew louder. Lords exchanged glances. Even Brother Aldous looked uncertain. Godwin leaned forward. Is this true, Lord Commander? You petitioned for Blackwood lands? It's a matter of public record, Aldric said stiffly. Sir Garrett died without male heir. An unmarried woman cannot hold military lands. I petitioned to purchase them legally. After I refused your marriage proposal, Eadlyn interrupted, her voice cutting like steel. 3 months before Clara died, you asked for my hand. I declined. You said, and I quote, "You'll regret choosing pride over protection, my lady." 2 witnesses heard those words. One was Clara Millerson. The hall erupted. Lords shouted questions. Officials called for order. Through it all, Aldric's face had gone from flushed to ashen. Lies, he bellowed, slamming his fist on the table before him. She twists facts to save herself. Clara's death was tragic, but it has nothing to do with marriage proposals or land disputes. The wolf was found at the scene, physical evidence that cannot lie. Through the window, Fenrir's howl pierced the chaos. The wolf had risen on his hind legs, straining toward the hall, his massive body silhouetted against morning light. The sound was primal, accusing, a voice given to the voiceless. Captain Brennan stood, his scarred face thoughtful. The wolf's behavior is evidence too, my lord. In my 40 years of service, I've seen war dogs trained to kill show less specific aggression. That beast wants you. Only you, not the squire who accused you, not the guards who restrain him. You, because the witch commands it. Aldric's composure was fracturing, cracks spreading like ice under pressure. This entire spectacle is designed to what? Godwin's voice cut through like a judge's gavel. To expose truth, to question a conviction built on circumstantial evidence and your testimony alone. He stood, and the hall fell silent. I have served the king's justice for 30 years, Lord Commander, and in that time, I've learned that when too many convenient pieces fall into place too perfectly, someone is arranging them. Aldric's eyes blazed with something between rage and desperation. You would take the word of a condemned witch and a frightened boy over a Lord Commander? Over 9 months of accepted verdict? He gestured wildly at Eadlyn. She stands before you in chains, guilty by law and evidence, and you entertain this fantasy because a dog growled? Not a dog, Eadlyn said quietly. A wolf. A creature who survived in Blackwood Forest for 8 years, who learned to read threats and truth in ways humans have forgotten. He knows what you are, Lord Commander. He's known since that night, and unlike me, he cannot be silenced by chains or cells or fear of flames. The 2 locked eyes across the hall, the condemned woman and the Lord Commander. And in that moment, everyone present felt the shift. The balance of certainty tilting, the foundation of accepted truth beginning to crack. Godwin's voice rang with authority. This council will investigate further. The execution is officially stayed. Lord Commander Thorngate, you will surrender your sword and remain within the fortress until— No. Aldric's hand flew to his empty belt, where his sword should have been. The gesture instinctive and damning. I will not be treated like a common criminal based on animal behavior and conspiracy. But it was too late. The desperation in his voice, the wild look in his eyes, everyone heard it. Everyone saw it. The truth was coming, inexorable as dawn, and no amount of authority or rage could stop it now. The great hall's heavy doors groaned open, and every head turned as an elderly woman entered, leaning on a gnarled walking stick. She wore the simple homespun dress of a village healer, her gray hair bound in a practical braid. But her eyes, pale blue and sharp as winter frost, missed nothing as they swept the assembled lords and officials. Mildred Ashwood, Godwin said, recognition flickering across his face. The village healer who examined Clara Millerson's body. Aye, my lord. Her voice carried surprisingly well for someone so aged, rough as old leather but clear. She approached the center of the hall with slow dignity, her stick tapping against stone. I've come because I heard what's happening here, and because I've held my tongue for 9 months while it ate at my conscience like rot. Brother Aldous shifted uneasily. The healer gave testimony at the original trial. The healer tried to give testimony, Mildred corrected sharply. I was told my observations were noted, but that final determinations would be made by proper authorities. Her mouth twisted bitterly, meaning men. Godwin gestured for her to continue. Speak freely, Healer Ashwood. What observations were dismissed? Mildred turned to face the assembled court, her weathered face grave. I examined young Clara's body the morning she was found. I've been healing and laying out the dead for 46 years. I know wolf kills. She paused, letting the weight of her experience settle over the room. Those wounds weren't from wolf claws. The murmuring began immediately. Aldric's face went rigid. Explain, Godwin commanded. Wolf kills tear and crush, Mildred said, her voice taking on the practiced cadence of someone who'd described wounds countless times. Jaws that strong don't make clean cuts. They rip flesh, shatter bone, leave punctures in clusters where teeth grip and shake. It's violent, messy, unmistakable. She looked directly at Eadlyn, sympathy softening her sharp features. Clara had none of that. Then what did she have? Godwin leaned forward. Clean puncture wounds. 3 of them. Chest, abdomen, and throat, sword width. The kind of precision you get from a blade, not fangs. Mildred's stick tapped the floor for emphasis. Her hands had defensive cuts across the palms. She tried to grab the blade. You don't grab at wolf jaws. You can't. But you instinctively try to stop a sword. The hall had gone deathly quiet. Even the morning birdsong outside seemed to have ceased. There were lacerations that could have been mistaken for claw marks, Mildred continued. But they were too uniform, too straight, made post-mortem, I'd wager, to disguise the blade wounds. And the blood pattern was wrong. Most of it pooled beneath her, not sprayed outward like it would be in an animal attack. Brother Aldous found his voice, shaky now. But the wolf was found there, with blood on its muzzle. Aye, and I noted that too. The blood on the wolf's fur was smeared, not splattered, like he'd nuzzled her, tried to move her. There was dirt in his paws, consistent with digging. He'd been trying to reach her, not kill her. Mildred's voice gentled. That wolf was trying to help, not harm. But no one wanted to hear it from an old woman who sets bones and births babies. Godwin's face had gone hard as granite. Why didn't you press this testimony at trial? I tried, my lord. I told the magistrate, told the guards who came to question me. I was told, she glanced at Aldric, and there was steel in her gaze, that my woman's understanding of violence was insufficient. That physical evidence of the wolf's presence outweighed my medical observations. That I should stick to herbs and midwifery and leave justice to men who understood such things. This is absurd. Aldric's voice cracked across the hall like a whip. The woman's memory is faulty after 9 months. She's elderly, confused. My memory's sharp as the day I examined that poor girl, Mildred snapped. And I wrote everything down. Every wound, every measurement, every observation. I still have my notes, my lord steward, if you'd care to review them. Bring them, Godwin ordered immediately. Then he turned to the clerk hovering near the wall. And bring the original investigation records, everything related to physical evidence. The wait felt eternal. The hall buzzed with whispered conversations. Eadlyn stood motionless, hardly daring to breathe, watching as the foundation of her conviction crumbled piece by piece. Through the window, Fenrir had gone still, as if he too sensed the shift. When the documents arrived, Godwin spread them across the judgment table. His eyes scanned Mildred's careful notes, then the official report. His jaw tightened. The official report makes no mention of sword wounds. It states only, quote, injuries consistent with animal attack. He looked up at the magistrate who'd overseen the original investigation. Did you receive the healer's detailed observations? The magistrate, a thin man with nervous hands, nodded reluctantly. Yes, my lord. But we deemed them speculative. The wolf's presence was indisputable evidence. The wolf fur found on Clara's dress, Godwin said slowly, reading further. Was it tested for blood? Silence. Was it? Godwin's voice hardened. It wasn't deemed necessary, my lord, the magistrate stammered. Mildred laughed, a harsh sound, because it had no blood on it. I noted that too. Fresh wolf fur, clean, like it had been plucked and placed there after death. The hall erupted. Lords shouted over each other. Brother Aldous clutched his cross. And Aldric. Aldric had gone very still, very pale, his eyes darting toward the exits. Enough. Godwin's command silenced them. He turned to the guards. "Bring Aldric Thorngate, squire, now." The young man who was brought in looked terrified, barely older than Oswin. He trembled before the judgment seat, eyes fixed on the floor. "Tell me about the wolf fur," Godwin said quietly, "and speak truth, boy. Your soul depends on it." The squire's resistance lasted perhaps 5 seconds. Then he crumbled. "My lord ordered me to take fur from the captured wolf, after it was caged. He gave me Clara's dress and told me to press the fur into the fabric, make it look natural." Tears streamed down his face. He said it was necessary for justice, that the witch needed clear evidence against her. "I didn't know. I swear I didn't know it was false evidence, I thought." "You thought you were following orders," Godwin finished, his voice laden with disgust. He turned to Aldric, and his expression was colder than Eadlyn had ever seen. "Lord Commander Aldric Thorngate, you stand accused of murder, false testimony, and conspiracy to condemn an innocent woman." Aldric exploded from his seat. "You'll all hang for this conspiracy. I am the king's appointed authority. I will not be subjected to." "The only conspiracy here is yours, Thorngate," Godwin said, his voice cutting through the rage like a blade. "By order of the king's law, and by the power vested in me as royal steward, I hereby stay Lady Eadlyn Blackwood's execution, and order your immediate arrest. Guards, secure him." As guards moved to flank Aldric, the man's face twisted with fury and something else. Desperation, finally naked and undeniable. Outside, Fenrir's howl rose victorious, echoing off stone walls like a proclamation of justice, finally served. The investigation moved with the swift brutality of an avalanche once the first stone fell. Within an hour, Aldric's chambers were searched, his personal effects brought before the council. His sword, the ornate blade he'd worn for a decade as Lord Commander, was laid across Godwin's table, and even from a distance, Eadlyn could see the dark staining in the intricate metalwork of the crossguard. Blood, the armorer confirmed after careful examination, his experienced eye tracing the grooves where liquid had seeped and dried. Old blood, settled deep in the decorative scrollwork. Someone cleaned the blade but missed the guard. It happens when you're rushed. He looked up at Godwin. "This could match the time frame. 9 months. Maybe 10. Test it," Godwin ordered. "Compare it to the records of Clara Millerson's wounds." While they waited, the flood began. It started with a farmer who'd kept silent out of fear, then a blacksmith's wife, then a merchant who'd traveled through Blackwood lands that spring. One by one, they came forward, emboldened by Aldric's fall from grace, speaking truths they'd buried under intimidation and doubt. "I saw Lord Aldric arguing with Sir Garrett 3 weeks before the old knight died," the farmer testified, wringing his cap between calloused hands. Heated words about Lady Eadlyn's inheritance. Lord Aldric said women holding military lands was against natural law. Sir Garrett told him his daughter would inherit over his dead body, being used as an excuse to steal her birthright. The blacksmith's wife stepped forward, her voice trembling but determined. "Lord Aldric came to our forge the week after Sir Garrett's death, asked my husband to value the Blackwood estates, said he'd be purchasing them soon. We thought it strange. Lady Eadlyn wasn't selling, but he seemed so certain." The merchant's testimony cut deepest. "I was at the magistrate's office when Lord Aldric filed his petition for the Blackwood lands. This was 2 days after Lady Eadlyn's arrest. He had all the documents prepared already. Transfer papers, valuations, everything. Like he'd been planning it for weeks." Godwin's clerk brought forth the land documents, spreading them across the table. The inheritance law was clear. If Eadlyn died without heir and under charges of witchcraft or treason, her lands would revert to crown control and could be purchased by petition. Aldric's petition sat at the bottom of the stack, dated 3 days after her conviction. "Perfect timing," Captain Brennan observed darkly, almost like he knew she'd be convicted before the trial even ended. Aldric had been silent through most of it, his face a mask of stone as his world collapsed around him. But when Godwin began reading through the land documents aloud, something in him finally snapped. "She's a woman!" he roared, slamming his fists on the table before him hard enough to make the candlesticks jump. "A woman has no right to those lands. Sir Garrett was a fool to promise them to her instead of ensuring they passed to a proper lord who could defend them." Spittle flew from his lips, his face purpling with rage. "I've served this kingdom for 15 years. I've bled for it. And some girl who reads books and runs with wolves thinks she deserves her father's legacy?" The hall went absolutely silent. Even the birds outside seemed to have stopped singing. "There it is," Eadlyn said quietly, and every eye turned to her. She stood straight despite her chains, and for the first time in 9 months, she looked like the Lord's daughter she was born to be. The real crime. Not murder. Not witchcraft. The crime of being born female and daring to keep what was mine. Aldric's laugh was bitter, unhinged. "You refused me. Refused marriage. Refused to do your duty as a woman. Refused to let someone worthy take what should have been mine. His eyes blazed with years of festering resentment. So yes, I ensured you'd lose it. Clara was in the wrong place. Saw me on your lands, surveying what I'd soon own. She had to be silenced. And framing you, the witch who kept wolves like pets, who rode alone like a man, who refused her natural place, it was easy. Everyone already feared you. The admission hung in the air like smoke. Several lords gasped. Brother Aldous made the sign of the cross. Even the guards holding Aldric looked horrified. You murdered an innocent girl, Godwin said, his voice shaking with barely controlled fury. To frame an innocent woman. To steal lands you had no right to. Because your pride couldn't bear a woman telling you no. I did what was necessary. Aldric shouted. What any man with sense would do. This kingdom can't be ruled by women and wolves and… Enough. Godwin stood, and his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Captain Brennan, strip him of rank. Guards, place him in chains. 4 guards moved forward. Aldric tried to fight, but they were ready for it. His commander's cloak was torn from his shoulders. The insignia ripped from his tunic. Chains, heavy iron chains like the ones Eadlyn had worn, were locked around his wrists. Lord Commander Aldric Thorngate, Godwin pronounced, each word falling like a hammer blow. You are hereby charged with the murder of Clara Millerson, conspiracy to commit murder, high treason against a rightful landowner, bearing false witness before the king's court, corruption of justice, and the attempted execution of an innocent woman through fraudulent means. Aldric thrashed against the guards, his composure completely shattered. You can't. You're nothing, Eadlyn said, and her voice carried such quiet finality that it silenced him more effectively than any shout. You're a small man who killed a child and destroyed lives because you couldn't accept that my father chose me. That's all you are, all you'll ever be. As guards dragged him toward the dungeon, toward the very cell Eadlyn had occupied for 9 months, he screamed threats and curses that echoed off the stone walls. But no one listened anymore. His power was broken, his lies exposed, his crimes laid bare. Eadlyn watched him disappear through the doorway, this man who'd haunted her nightmares, who'd stolen 9 months of her life, who'd planned her death. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction, only a vast, hollow exhaustion, and the faint stirring of something that might, eventually, become peace. From the courtyard, Fenrir's howl rose, long, powerful, primal, not a cry of mourning this time, but something else. Victory, vindication, the sound a wolf makes when the hunt is finally over and justice has teeth. The great hall erupted in chaos as lords shouted questions and officials scrambled to document everything. But through it all, Eadlyn stood silent, still wearing chains that would soon be struck away, and let herself believe, finally, impossibly, that she might actually survive to see tomorrow's dawn. The sound of chains being struck away echoed through the great hall like church bells ringing victory. Eadlyn stood motionless as the blacksmith worked, hammer striking the pins that had held iron shackles to her wrists for 9 months. When the metal finally fell away, clattering against stone, she stared at her freed hands as if they belonged to someone else. The skin beneath was raw, scarred in perfect circles where the iron had worn away everything soft. Royal Steward Godwin rose from the judgment seat, and the hall fell silent. His weathered face carried the weight of a man who'd nearly allowed an innocent woman to burn, but also the relief of one who'd stopped it in time. Lady Eadlyn Blackwood, his voice rang clear and formal, carrying to every corner of the hall. By the power vested in me by the king's law and after thorough investigation, I hereby declare you free and innocent of all charges. The accusation of witchcraft is dismissed. The charge of murder is dismissed. Your conviction is overturned, your name cleared, and your father's honor, and yours, fully restored to the Blackwood line. The words washed over her like rain after drought. Free, innocent, restored. Each one a gift she'd stopped believing she'd ever receive. One by one, the lords and officials who had condemned her 9 months ago rose from their benches. Some looked ashamed, others relieved. A few simply acknowledged what justice demanded. But they all bowed, deep, formal bows of respect, to the woman they'd called witch. Eadlyn didn't bow back. She simply turned and walked toward the doors, her steps steady despite legs weakened by imprisonment, her head high despite exhaustion that went bone deep. The castle gates stood open before her, and beyond them stretched a world she'd thought she'd never see again. Sunlight, real, unfiltered sunlight, struck her face as she crossed the threshold, and she stopped, closing her eyes against its brilliance. 9 months of torch smoke and darkness had made her forget how warm the sun felt, How alive it made everything seem. A joyous bark shattered the moment. Fenrir exploded from the courtyard where handlers had released him, a gray blur of muscle and fur racing toward her with such speed that guards instinctively stepped back. He didn't slow. He crashed into her with the force of devotion itself, nearly knocking her over, whining and licking her face and pressing his massive body against hers like he could somehow absorb her into his being and never let her go again. "I know," she whispered, burying her face in his fur, breathing in the scent of him, earth and wolf and wild things that survived. "I know, boy. We made it. We actually made it." Captain Brennan approached leading a horse, not some broken-down nag, but a proper mare, dappled gray with kind eyes and strong legs. Saddlebags hung from her flanks, bulging with provisions. "From the castle stores, my lady," Brennan said gruffly. "Food, coin, and some of your father's effects we found in storage. Seemed right you should have them." He paused, then added quietly, "I'm sorry it took us so long to see the truth. You saw it when it mattered," Eadlyn said, accepting the reins. "That's more than most." Squire Oswin waited nearby, twisting his cap between nervous hands. When she looked at him, he dropped to one knee. "My lady, I'm sorry. I should have spoken sooner. Should have been brave enough to." "Stand up, Oswin." Her voice was gentle but firm. When he rose, she met his eyes, those young, guilt-stricken eyes. "You were 16 and terrified. He threatened your family. Your life." She placed a hand on his shoulder. "But you spoke when it mattered most, when I was hours from death and no one else would risk themselves. That's true courage, not the absence of fear, but standing up despite it." Tears streaked his face. "What will you do now, my lady?" Eadlyn looked toward the horizon, where Blackwood Forest rose dark and green in the distance, the lands her father had died defending, the home she'd thought she'd never see again. "I'm going home, going to rebuild what was stolen, going to prove my father was right to trust me with his legacy." She swung into the saddle with a grace that 9 months of imprisonment hadn't stolen, and Fenrir immediately positioned himself beside the horse, looking up at her with those amber eyes that had saved her life. The wolf who'd remembered when everyone else forgot. The loyal heart that had refused to be silenced. They rode through the fortress gates, and with each step the castle fell further behind. The dungeons, the courtyard, the great hall, where she'd been condemned and then freed. All of it receding into memory. Villagers lined the road, watching in silence. Some looked ashamed, others curious. A few even bowed. Eadlyn didn't acknowledge them. Her eyes stayed fixed ahead on Blackwood Forest, on home, on the future that had been stolen, and was now, impossibly, hers again. She was no longer the girl who'd waited 9 months for others to deliver justice. She was the woman who'd let loyalty speak truth when words failed, who'd survived stone walls and false accusations, and the very edge of death itself, who'd been chosen by her father and proven worthy of that choice. The noon sun climbed higher as horse and wolf and woman made their way toward the tree line. Behind them, Greymorn Fortress grew smaller. Ahead, Blackwood Forest waited, ancient, wild, and patient. Her lands. Her legacy. Her second chance to live the life her father had believed she deserved. As they reached the forest's edge, Eadlyn stopped and looked back one final time. The fortress sat gray and distant against blue sky, a place of endings that had somehow become a place of new beginnings. She raised one scarred hand in farewell, not to the castle, but to the woman she'd been before, the one who'd doubted herself, who'd thought maybe they were right about her. That woman was dead, burned away in 9 months of darkness. What emerged was harder, clearer, free. Eadlyn turned back to the forest and urged her horse forward. Fenrir bounded ahead, disappearing into the green shadows before circling back, his joy infectious and wild. The trees swallowed them, woman and wolf, silhouetted against dappled sunlight, riding toward home, toward truth restored, toward everything that waited beyond the darkness, toward life. This story reminds us that truth doesn't always speak with human voice, that loyalty can survive imprisonment, accusations, and fear itself. In a world quick to condemn what it doesn't understand, sometimes the innocent are saved not by courts or doctrine, but by a wolf who remembered. Justice delayed is not justice denied, when courage finally finds its voice. If this medieval tale of loyalty and redemption moved you, please like, share, and subscribe. Stay with us for more powerful stories of courage, truth, and bonds that transcend time itself. Your next epic journey awaits. Click now and let the story continue.